Well, hello, boys and girls. Welcome to another exciting edition of the internet's favorite movie centric list making podcast, 1021. I am one of your hosts, Josh, joined as always by Jen. Yeah, you see what I did there?
Hey,
Nothing. I did nothing.
everybody.
No
Yeah, well,
extraneous,
I'm.
you know, intros. Just keeping it simple to the point, and talking directly to the audience. Yeah, see what I did there?
I see. I see. Is this going to be the whole show? Is the whole show just going to be awkward pauses?
Absolutely. If
Oh,
there's not an awkward pause, it's definitely not a Wadco production. Hey, ooh,
I
what
mean,
a
it could
week
work.
it's been.
It could work. Could work.
How are you?
Um, Pretty good. I don't know. I feel like the state of the world this week has definitely gotten me down a little bit.
Yeah, it's been kind of a
Lots.
bummer,
There's a lot
to say
going
the
on
least.
in the world.
A
So
lot of
much.
bad stuff.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I guess there's always bad stuff, but it's degrees, and this particular week seems, yeah, extremely heavy. So, yeah.
That's why I think we should do our itty bitty meager little part in the realm of escapism and give people something else to think about for a little while.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. I will say that one of the things that I did sort of as homework for this week's assignment, which I'll let you introduce, was I went back and I read all of my sort of writing books and you know how to produce, or how to write, not produce, but how to produce a good screenplay, how to write a good screenplay, and sort of the do's and the don'ts. And I have to say, every single one of my books say don't do exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. So I have some feelings on this one, but introduce it. What are we talking about tonight?
Well, tonight's all about grabbing our deconstructing literary sledgehammers and breaking down fourth walls. We're talking about all of our favorite films that bust down that barrier between story and reality, and it's going to be, from what I understand, to the pre-show chat, quite the interesting night.
I definitely have big feelings about just about everything that we are going to talk about tonight, including my own picks for movies. It's because even when I like the movie, I sort of dislike this particular uh, device. So
Mhm.
it will be interesting conversation as we go. I would like, if you don't mind, I would like to start out though by saying that um, some of the earliest uses of breaking the fourth wall came to us via um, the Three Stooges. Well, and Laurel and Hardy. So we'll say Laurel and Hardy, the Three Stooges, where a piece of humor would happen that perhaps they thought maybe the audience wouldn't quite pick up on, or that they would, or that the humor was like, you know, crafty. And so they wanted to make sure that the audience understood that they needed to, as a sort of modern day example, insert an emoji. And the insert emoji was one of the characters looking at the camera and either giving sort of side eye, or giving a grimace, or
Or a sigh.
looking a bit perplexed, sighs, yes. And so it was really sort of like yeah, again, inserting an emoji into the movie to make sure that they punctuated the humor properly. So that's sort of
Hmm.
where some of this sprang from. But then it became a real narrative device. Now, based on the number of these that are out there, it's small. I mean, this is a very small group of movies that have real fourth wall break. Sometimes there are things that seem like maybe a fourth wall break, and maybe that's kind of open to interpretation. But where you have
Hmm.
real fourth wall breaks, it's a very small group of movies that have done this. So it doesn't happen often, and I think there's a good reason. But where it does happen a lot, and this is why I get a little bit upset with it, it happens a lot when the storytellers don't trust the audience to understand what they are going to be told, or they feel as if there is too much that is heavy and difficult, and they have to add either a blend of humor or some kind of extra exposition that cannot be done in a storytelling format. And now, to me, this is weak and sloppy storytelling. This is a storyteller who isn't able to somehow pull together all of the narrative threads that they need to in regular story format. And they have to add this addition of, Ferris Bueller looking at the camera and telling us exactly what is going on, because otherwise, hey, you audience, you're not gonna know. And I just find that to be, I think there was a case for it to be cleverly, and I'm putting this in quotes, endearing. It was cleverly endearing in, maybe one or two movies that have kind of come down. But then it sort of got used as a way to extrapolate dark features of narrative storytelling. An awful lot of times we use fourth wall break when it comes to really terrible characters like, well, I'll get into some of them as we go, because horror has been absolutely sort of inundated with this particular type of trope, and it's not, I find that it is just sloppy on the part of the storytellers. Like, tell the story in a way that makes sense without having to use the characters talking directly to the audience. That's not a movie. That's a Netflix documentary. That's a docu-series. That's a hey, let's join over on Discovery Channel and we'll get a guy telling us about what's happening in the world, and he can narrate a little bit while he shows us clips of what has happened in the past. I just find this particular type of storytelling so disingenuous to what I think is good movie making. So there's my 2 cents. Now you'll know as I go into this sort of why I kind of get down a little bit on some of these movies. And I'll explain why in each one of the movies.
Well, then I guess the only thing to do is figure out which one of us is going to throw our hat into the ring first.
Well, since it's your choice, or since it's your yeah, just it was your choice this week, how about you start and I will, and then I'll follow.
Okay, well, yeah, okay. Fourth wall breaking. Let's get into it. My first uh, entry is not going to take a lot of time because it's a movie that I just talked about, but because I wanted to put it on the list, and quite frankly, it was, one of the major reasons I thought of doing it in the first place, and I felt it necessary to add. I am talking about Wayne's World. I know we just had a discussion about Wayne's World recently, but I'm just you know as you were saying, when it comes to Wayne Campbell sort of addressing the audience, and Garth, also stealing the camera away for a second under the table, if you will. That's it is what it is. Take the talk to the audience, take them on the journey, whatever. Specifically, the reason why I think Wayne's World makes a fine addition um, is the brief take that it has on product placement in film, about how these guys are definitely not going to sell out and just you know do whatever the corporate overlords say, as they are you know uh, shilling for things like Pepsi and Pizza Hut and all sorts of crazy stuff. It's absolutely, in my opinion, it's absolutely brilliant bit of comedy that it works once, and then hopefully you don't see anybody try to do it again. But it still works upon new viewings, and that's why it's my number 10.
So, and honestly, Wayne's World, as I said before, is sort of like the okay, it's a talk show, and so the premise of Wayne's World doesn't work without them addressing the camera directly, because there is no story of Wayne's World without it being the premise of Wayne's World, which is I'm in my basement, I'm talking to the camera, I'm doing my thing. If you don't have that in a movie, in a story with Wayne's World, then I think the audiences don't. Then it becomes less identifiable. Um, yeah, that is what it is. I don't know. I'm not a huge Wayne's World fan anyway, but I can. Wayne's World is one of the few movies where I can understand why the fourth wall needs to be broken, because it's not really a movie. We're not watching a movie. We're actually just watching the story of Wayne and Garth kind of go through their normal stuff, just like they're having their everyday talk with us in the basement. And so it's not really a movie.
Right.
Well, I should say it's not really a movie. It's not really, this isn't really like the narrative story of them. It's just them. And so it does kind of make sense. Does kind of
And
make
they
sense.
changed the ending too. They're like,
Um,
wait, this ending sucks. Let's change it. Let's do the
right,
Scooby Doo
right.
ending.
Which again, just kind of verifies that this isn't really a movie. This is just them goofing off and having fun. Okay, my number 10 is low hanging fruit would have been Spaceballs, because there's just so much of it in there. But I knew that Josh would probably put that on his list, so I didn't. I put instead History of the World Part 1, which is also a Mel Brooks. And Mel Brooks, it, th- this actually kind of annoys me about Mel Brooks, because quite honestly, I feel like he is brilliant enough to not use this particular device, this movie device. I'm unhappy with it, because for him, in especially in History of the World, um there's so much going on, and this is one of those movies where it feels like they could have easily sort of done away with that, and it wouldn't have cheapened the movie. It wouldn't have changed the movie at all. It wouldn't have given us anything less out of the film. And of course, I love the line, "It's good to be the king," which is one of the biggest lines in History of the World Part 1, where you can kind of feel that breaking of the fourth wall very obviously, because he looks right at the camera and he's like, "It's good to be the king." And it's funny, and it is funny, there's no doubt about it. But he could have said that to any other person on set. He could have had the piss boy walk by, and it would have been just as funny. But instead they chose to break the fourth wall. I will say that Mel Brooks in particular seems quite smitten with breaking the fourth wall. And Blazing Saddles is another good example, where Mel Brooks seems to have kind of an over love affair of telling us, the audience, haha, see, this is funny. I am actually kind of drawn with Mel Brooks to this idea that, like, he's not sure. I do this a lot in my everyday conversation. I'll say, um, do you understand? Do you know what I mean? Do you get it? You know? And that's because I'm unsure of my own communication style. I really struggle with it sometimes. But as a filmmaker and as a comedic genius, which Mel Brooks absolutely is, it feels so weird to have these moments where it's almost like he's looking at the camera and going, "Do you get it? Was that funny? I mean, haha, I'm going to laugh now because see, this was funny." Um, yeah, didn't particularly enjoy that particular aspect, but I will say the History of the World Part 1, despite a lot of the comedy not exactly aging super great, is still a fun watch. I really always enjoy it. So number 10 for me, History of the World Part 1.
It's good to be the king.
I really do like that line. It's a good line. I just wish you would have said it to anybody else.
You know what my favorite line from that movie is?
Quick Time Harch?
No,
Okay, that's one of my
but
favorite
I love
lines.
QuickTime Hutch.
I do love her. Madeline Kahn is so funny. Oh my gosh, I love Madeline Kahn.
Have you seen a pack of Trojans? Oh, I just sold my last one. That's not it though.
Yes,
It's
they're all. There's so many great lines.
oh piss boy, wee wee. Yes, a lot of it.
Yeah, see, see. That's why I mentioned the piss boy. It's exactly why. Yes, because I too also love that. I mean, as humor, it's silly humor, but it's great. It's fun humor. I do really. Again, I think Mel Brooks is pretty amazing. So.
Yes, and I will be talking about other pieces of his work later on. But I guess right now I'm gonna have another quick hit for you
Okay.
in something that is ultimately minor in the fourth wall breaking territory, but I still think worthy of a note. I'm talking about none other than Star Trek Six: The Undiscovered Country. I know, right? So, what is the fourth wall breaking moment in the final OG Star Trek crew movie? Well, it's the last bit of the movie where everybody looks at the camera as the final send off because they pretty much knew that was it. They weren't going to be getting together like that again for another film adventure. Just the OG crew. So a moment was taken for them to literally look into the camera, giving us a nice big uh, family photo, if you will. And I don't know. It seems like a shot of gratitude for everybody that took the journey with them for all those years. It's like I said, it's not a huge cinematic moment of fourth wall breaking, but I think it's a nice moment, and that's why it's my number 9.
Yeah, and if I could expand on that, I also
Oh,
I,
sure.
I feel like in that particular instance, that feels like a curtain call. That feels like a a way to acknowledge, actually, from the audience to the cast, instead of the other way around, which is the cast acknowledging the audience. And so in that moment, that does kind of work. I think that that's actually kind of good. Okay, my number 9. Ugh, man. Okay, so I really went back and forth on this. Um, and the reason that I went back and forth on it is because overall, I love Goodfellas. Okay, it's a good movie. It's a solid movie. It's got a little bit of everything in it. And in terms of I'm a huge fan of flawed characters. Okay, I love my flawed characters. I love my broken characters. I love my characters that kind of come from nowhere and end up making you just absolutely either cheer for them or just literally o- can't wait to see what happens next, even if you don't love them. And Goodfellas, I feel like, did that. I mean, it was difficult not to be just sort of, or feel, I guess, endeared to most people in this cast of characters. And my gut feeling is, okay, well, you know, here we have a story where there is a lot of over narration. And so y- when you get into narration from a character's POV, it can be very difficult, I think, to understand sort of like where that sort of ends and where a fourth wall break begins, because narration by itself is not fourth wall breaking. Narration is more like, here's the character telling you in his own words what's happening. But the reason that narration isn't fourth wall breaking is because narration serves the point of the story, and it keeps the story intact. It's woven into its own small cocoon. Fourth wall breaking is we break out of the cocoon and we get a peek inside at all of the guts and smash that are happening inside as everything's getting reorganized. And Goodfellas does both. And so it can be difficult to kind of figure out, where does Henry sort of stop with his narration and where does the actual fourth wall breaking begin. And I mean, it's pretty obvious after you've seen it, you know, but I think when you first go into it, it can be a little bit, you're not sure which one is which. But the reason that this one was also really hard for me is because although I love this movie, I do not really enjoy, or didn't enjoy, him having to address the audience, because I feel like in this particular situation, it kind of cheapened the experience altogether. We were so intimately up close with him for so long that to have him at the end sort of, you know, usher us out, seemed like it took everything that was good about the movie and just kind of said, okay, well, you know, you saw what you saw. And I can't say that I really liked that, but I will say that as a movie, Goodfellas is absolutely amazing. It is probably one of the best, I think, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, or Joe Pesci. I don't know why I said Pesci. And Ray Liotta combination, or just as a gangster movie, this is great. This just is great. I feel like if Kinte was around, he would be saying he loves this too, because we have talked extensively about this movie. Kinte, who I do other podcasts with, and we've talked a lot about what makes this movie good. The other thing that makes Goodfellas really great, I think, is there is an impeccable amount of timing in this film that gets everything just right. So just when things start to seem like they might be dragging a little, some very big action sequence will happen, or a very big reveal will happen, and it ends up being amazing. So Goodfellas is my number 9 choice. And the fourth wall breaking in this one is, it's not huge. There's more narration than there is fourth wall breaking, but it is there.
Okay. I understand that as a good film, according to many people.
Have you not seen it?
Oh, I've seen it.
Oh, okay. Just checking.
We're gonna leave that. We're gonna leave that sit right there because my number 8 is a classic, and for those that listen to the show on a regular basis, or just have seen me somewhere, you know it was gonna happen. Yes, of course, Kevin Smith made it to the list because, duh.
Of course.
So the question is, where? where does Kevin Smith fit in with the fourth wall breaking? You know, could I go with the I'd call it the big musical number from Clerks 2. That's a beautiful moment. Rosario Dawson's just absolutely amazing in that whole thing. You know, everybody kind of dancing, cheating to the camera. It's
Hey,
not a
she's really
super
good in
hit you.
Star Wars too.
Yeah, sure.
Just thought,
Yeah,
I just thought
yeah.
I'd throw that out there as a fourth wall break because sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going specifically with one gag, one movie, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And some of you are wondering, where? What? Hold on, let me think about that. Well, specifically,
Yeah, I'm
it's
one
when
of
Jay and
those.
Silent Bob go see Holden McNeil, played by Ben Affleck, and it's like a Jay and Silent Bob movie. Who would want to go see that? And then they turn to the camera, and it's not the first time. Well, it's the first time Kevin Smith would use that gag, because it would definitely come up again in reboot. But I think on this particular occasion, for the first time that he does this, doing a who would want to watch a Jay and Silent Bob movie as Jay and Silent Bob, then turn to the camera, looking at the audience, and get a little shrug. It's it's a cute little moment, and I always enjoy seeing it. Um,
Nice.
there are a few other kind of similar moments throughout the rest of the Jay and Silent Bob series of movies, but this is one of my favorites just because it was at the time kind of fresh.
So let's talk for a second as I move into my number 8 here, which is going to jump into a different genre. Let's talk a little bit about which genres seem to only work with fourth wall break, or only use it as a device with these particular ones. Um, Horror and comedy, or a combination of that, like action comedy, horror comedy. You know, these are the ones that definitely are the fourth wall breaks. Now, there are some notable exceptions, but almost all are supervillains or supervillains in their own minds. I can't think of, as an example, I can't think of a drama that uses fourth wall break as a narrative device. Can you?
That was on mute, wasn't I?
Yes, you are.
Of course. Drama that
Yes, a
uses it.
drama. Can
Hmm.
you think of a drama that has ever used a fourth wall break as a movie device, as a
Drama,
narrative device?
drama. You mean other than the um? Let's see. I guess the Wolf of Wall Street, does that count as drama?
I mean, I guess it does. I had a hard time with that one because I almost feel like that was, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure that that was what we thought it was.
I just
But
when it comes
it
to these things, you know, the Wolf of Wall Street, American Psycho, more serious subject matter. It just seems like it's more of a in your face narration than anything.
Well, now American Psycho did make my list, and I have many thoughts on the American Psycho fourth wall breaking, and for very different reasons. And I have a case to sort of make about why I think American Psycho used fourth wall break, which may or may not play into what I'm trying to get at with most of the discussion here tonight. Um, Sometimes I feel like you can use a fourth wall break as uh, as an interesting as an interesting idea, but when it's used in comedy, specifically when it's used in comedy, um, it feels cheap. It doesn't feel it it feels to me like l- okay, have you ever seen the play Our Town? I mean, it's pretty much a classic in
Not in a very,
American.
very long time.
Okay, well, it's a really classic American storytelling play. Most people, when they, have gone, if you're in drama club or, whatever, you have almost always seen a version of Our Town. And it's a really good play. It's got a lot to talk about, but it does this thing which I would consider to be in the play's narrative function to be fourth wall break, where it's not really narration, it's somebody actually talking to the audience. It's us as the audience listening to someone talking to us, not narrating the what is happening. It's not a Charles Dickens sort of over like a narration from Bob Cratchit, who's giving us a little bit of information about the Scrooge story before we start. It's not like that. It's very much, here, let me address you. And in comedy, it it takes on this different life. In Our Town, that feels like, okay, maybe there wasn't really a way for you to feel included in what was happening here without me addressing you directly. But in comedy, it sometimes feels like, hmm, okay, but why did you were your jokes not funny enough? Did you have to tell us or make it sort of like set the stage, seed the ground with what you thought was going to be some kind of fertilizer because you didn't think the jokes were going to land, or because you thought that you needed to have some kind of something else that just didn't exist in your narration? And I don't know what the answer to that is. I hope maybe we'll get to the bottom of it. But my number 8 movie is actually the horror part. It's very brief, and it's at the end of Hitchcock's Psycho. Now, one of the things that Psycho does really well is it makes us feel as if we're not really sure who is who. And when I say that, I mean, we know who Norman is, and we know that Norman has a mother. But then as time goes by, things start to get muddled, and we discover Norman's mother is actually dead. We find out that Norman is actually channeling his mother, thereby sort of muddying the water for us as the audience about who really was speaking at all of these times. Was it a voice in Norman's head? Was it Norman himself? What was really happening? And at the very end of Psycho, there is an overlay of Norman looking directly at us, the camera, and a skull sort of is superimposed on his face. And it's supposed to, I believe, represent that Norman's mother is basically living rent free in Norman's head. And it's like, let me address you, the audience, to give you this peek of information that just in case you didn't understand, or just in case it wasn't very clear, here's what's really going on. Now, in Psycho, it's really super short, and I, you know, it is what it is. I still don't think that Hitchcock needed to do that. I mean, far be it from me to say Hitchcock should or shouldn't have done something as if I'm some, great critic or could do it better, because of course I couldn't. I'm just, in my humble opinion, I don't feel like that was needed. However, as a device, it's a really interesting one. I did find it interesting. And I do remember seeing it and thinking, oh, that was for the audience. That was not part of the story. That was an addendum to the story. So kind of interesting. So my number 8 is Psycho.
That,
I do not love
that,
that movie. I don't know.
I've
I know
only seen
people
the
that.
one with Vince Vaughn.
Oh, Josh, please do yourself a favor. It's Halloween. Do yourself a favor and watch the original Psycho.
I guess.
I mean, not that Vince Vaughn, you know, yeah, it's an interesting story. It is, and it's the Psycho story, but the
Mhm.
original, the Hitchcock lighting. I mean, uh, you should definitely enjoy that. It's very very well done. It's so dramatic.
No, I did. Back in the day when Universal Studios had that sort of special effects show.
Hmm.
Uh, that was one of the things that they really broke down and showed you how it was shot,
Mm,
with a live demonstration, and it was pretty cool, I will say.
very. I can only imagine. I mean, it's so exciting. I really Hitchcock. All of his original movies are so uh they're even today they have really stood up to the test of time. Even today they are very sort of buzzworthy. There's something really brilliant about that particular type of storytelling, because so much of the storytelling is not only in the story, but the story itself is in the lighting, is in the set design, is in knowing exactly where the characters are in the frame, and then maybe when things are off, putting the characters just a little bit off center so that you feel as if things are not quite right. But why aren't they quite right? You don't know. There's just some brilliance in Hitchcock designs.
Now, I am familiar with a lot of Hitchcock work, just not uh, certain titles that have kind of not been added to my seen it list yet.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I'm gonna move on to my number 7. The weird thing about my number 7 is, again, it's one of those things that unless you've seen it, you're wondering what there's a fourth wall break in that movie. Uh, yeah, yeah, there is, and it comes as a again a kind of a send off to the viewer as the movie wraps up. I'm talking, of course, about the Fablemans.
Hmm.
It's it made me giggle. It still makes me giggle, to know that Steven Spielberg, is telling essentially the story of his life, in a somewhat fictionalized, version. Uh, and there's a point where younger him gets to meet his hero, John Ford. Uh, it's the simple idea that came from this is, well, let me read the quote directly. It says, "When the horizon's at the bottom, it's interesting. When the horizon's at the top, it's interesting. When the horizon's in the middle, it's boring as now. Good luck to you." So they're talking about where the horizon is when you're, setting up your shot. And the young man listened to this, exits the office, heads outside, and as he's walking away from the camera, horizon's dead center, and then in a jerky motion, almost like an afterthought, the camera just quickly pans up, like, "Oh, gotta lower that horizon." And I thought ending the Fablemans on that gag, spoilers by the way, I guess, was 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 a lot of fun, and I'm pretty sure that Spielberg himself was giggling pretty hard at the idea of, you know, sending that little joke out there into the world. The Fablemans is my number 7 because nothing happened. It's boring when the horizon's in the middle.
That's actually, I think that's actually kind of. Although, okay, let me ask you this: if it
Hmm.
hadn't had the fourth wall break, do you think anything would have significantly changed?
No, absolutely nothing would have changed. It was literally the last shot.
Right, right, yeah. That which is
The
a
the
really
only
similar thing
thing
to Psycho.
the only thing that really changes is you go from going, okay, this kid's on his way to, all right, because the kid is the director of this movie. Okay, just you're leaving on a laugh.
Right, right. Yeah, I guess, yeah. I guess that's why I ask whether it was like important to the movie or not important to the movie. Because yeah, that's the sort of the way I felt with Psycho too.
I think,
Okay.
when it comes down to it, and the story being, he wants to grow up, make films, and make people, happy and laugh and whatnot. Uh, and it kind of does come full circle for that, as he leaves you, the audience, with a smile on your face as the
Yeah.
credits start to roll. But um, just trying to think, and it's difficult to think. Thinking's hard. Don't do it.
Mm. I'm gonna I'm going to throw a tiny bit of knowledge out there for you.
More thinking.
More thinking. Um, in literature, this speaks to my hey, I did homework for this podcast. Although I already knew this part, my research that I did was to discover whether this was frowned upon or whether it was encouraged. Like, if I wrote this way, would my editor send me back my manuscript and say, "What kind of drugs are you smoking?" Or would she send it back to me and go, "Oh my God, you're so brilliant"? Um, Chances are neither of those two things would happen, but I was kind of curious. Um, in literature, breaking the fourth wall is called metalepsis. Now, metalepsis is sort of like a derivative of where we get it sort of stems from our term that is what we now call meta, right? We call metafiction a character acknowledging that they are in fiction. So when we experience something that is meta, what we're saying is, even though we think that the experience that we're in is, this one experience, we recognize that we are having this experience in the experience, and then that becomes a meta experience. So what we have is sort of like a metafiction, which is the character knowing that they are in their fictitious environment and acknowledging that and saying, hey, I'm a fictitious character telling you who are reading fiction that I am fictitious, yet I'm acknowledging you. Now, I've read some really interesting fantasy work where they were sort of breaking dimensions, and because they were breaking dimensions, they didn't have any other choice than to talk to their different selves, and sometimes thinking that we were their selves, the reader were their selves, um, and it created a really interesting dialogue, but it was confusing. And this, I think, is probably one of the reasons that also it's not used very significantly. But I just thought I'd throw that out there. Metalepsis is what it's called when you use it in fiction. Okay, my number 7. My number 7 movie is so a lot of people haven't seen the sadly the original Pink Panther movies. They are a hilarious set of movies about an inspector. His name is Clouseau, and he has an assistant, and he gets into, let's just say, uh, a lot of bumbling sort of problems. Usually he's like the inspector that kind of stumbles on his shoes only to find that he then discovers the clue that was needed. But it's usually a lot more funny than that. But that it's just that kind of idea. The Pink Panther is so funny. Originally the Pink Panther was this diamond, and the whole story was around somebody who stole the diamond, and then they hired Clouseau to go find it. And the the subsequent ones were still just as funny, but it's sort of like all maintained this one, I don't know, over narrative. It's really hilarious altogether. I don't know how to describe each individual movie, but they're all sort of around the same thing, which is Peter Sellers is Inspector Clouseau, and he is just the worst inspector ever, but he always gets his man in the end, and that is usually pretty hilarious. His assistant, his sidekick, if you will, is this character named Kato, and Kato is always trying to perfect ways to kill Clouseau. And so the two of them have many, many, many slapstick, hilarious comedy scenes where he's trying to kill Clouseau, and Clouseau has to come up with all these interesting ways of basically counteracting. It's very funny. If you like any kind of slapstick comedy, you'll love this. But the story itself, really, they all carry themselves. Okay, so let's get to the fourth wall breaking. So in the fourth wall breaking in the Pink Panther is typically he will look at the camera and he will say something to the audience like uh, admitting that he saw something that nobody else saw. And that I think is actually pretty funny in sort of by itself. This is one of the few that I actually think is it kind of works. Because I don't think that Clouseau thinks that he is an actual. I mean, I think he thinks he's an inspector, but I think he knows that he's so bad. And so when he acknowledges that something has gone his way, it's almost like wink wink, did you see that? I finally got something right. And in this case, this kind of works. The character is acknowledging that they are bad at what they do fictionally, and somebody gave them something that didn't quite work in the universe, like, ooh, this is exactly what I needed. And then he has to acknowledge it to the audience as if, see, this wasn't actually part of the deal, this wasn't actually part of my character. And so for that reason I actually kind of liked it. So my number 7 is Pink Panther. Take your pick of which movie he does that. Peter Sellers does it in almost every single one of them. So that's my pick.
I do believe that is a good choice.
God, I'm always telling people that they should watch these movies. I know they seem old and dated because, oh, they're from the 1960s. No, they're so funny. I mean, yeah, they're really funny.
People need to realize that there's nothing wrong with the old movies.
No, sometimes they are. I won't say they're better because I don't think they're. It's not that they're better; they're different. But they are forgotten gems in our vault of movie history. So yeah, definitely give those choices. And Peter Sellers is he's brilliant as as a comedian. This man knew every single place in time where his body was and somehow managed to make everything that he does with his body hilarious. Like, that's rare. That's just rare. You just don't see that often. So
I hit
So
the wrong
you
button.
are at you're at you're at number 6.
Okay, well, my number 6. Sorry, I gotta get off that terrible,
No, that's
terrible
good
French
actually. I
accent.
love it. I love it.
Um, is Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Okay.
I honestly, I do love the movie, but I can I make a confession?
Yeah.
It's sorry for some reason my business partner slash co-host of the podcast is trying to call me right now, not realizing that the company that he half owns is on the air.
Oh. Well, maybe he
Begging you, Brandon, watch the show.
maybe he's just trying to break the fourth wall for you there, Josh.
That could be it. Is Brandon a secret genius? The answer is no. But my confession, there's this guy. His name's John Hughes. Have you heard of him?
Of course I've heard John Hughes.
He's known for making films.
Baby's Day
Uh,
Out.
sure,
I love Baby's Day Out.
but more specifically, he's known for making what some people call very good films.
Hey, I loved Baby's Day Out. 16 Candles?
16 Candles is one that I definitely have issues with. But I enjoy The Breakfast Club. I
Okay, so
enjoy Ferris
not that
Bueller.
John Hughes, not that John Hughes. Wait a minute. Get to the John Hughes that where he's like, this is the best one.
Yeah.
Because clearly I'm bringing up all the bad ones.
I guess 16 Candles had a time and place, but watching it now, it's like, wait, that day is gone,
Yes,
and
yes.
we
It was
can't go
definitely a
back to that.
moment. Yes.
It was so to use a term that kids use today, so cringy.
Yes,
Uh,
it is very cringe.
it hurts. It hurts. So, with that being said, I do enjoy me some Ferris Bueller. It is a fun movie that you can really kind of get get sidetracked with some crazy fan theories, right? Like, is this all just in Cameron's head? Is Ferris just a figment of his imagination? What is going on?
So that would actually make sense. That fourth wall breaking then would make sense.
It would. It would. Um, but I think for the sake of adding it to the list, and the fact that it was never clarified that it really was just a fever dream from Cameron's perspective, which it would make a lot of things make sense. But then again, it's getting a sequel, so we'll see. I think that will like canonize everything as legit
Mm.
once that sequel hits. Anyway, throughout, Ferris addresses us, the audience, is to kind of take us through what's going on and explain the ins and outs of his, relationships with the people around him. And every once in a while, kind of wink at the camera, like, yeah, I'm really cool. Everybody knows this. It's somebody that, as I watch it as a 41-year-old, I go, oh, I remember when I was a teenager doing those things, obviously lying to anybody that'll listen. And
Mm.
I just long for the days of being um, a carefree teenager, wondering why I didn't, take more chances and get more messy and make more mistakes. To paraphrase Miss Frizzle. I think the ultimate ability of Ferris Bueller's Day Off is to be able to identify with Ferris and Cameron and his sister and his parents, all through different points of your own life as you kind of growing up. You find that you're not just one of these people. You eventually have to be all of them at some point. And to have a friendly guiding voice in the form of Matthew Broderick as Ferris Bueller is, I'm going to say it's comforting because he was kind of the boy next door back then. And, you know, you couldn't help but like him. And that's one of the reasons why this movie became so iconic. Just the way he would not just Ferris Bueller didn't look at the camera. Ferris Bueller never looked to the camera once.
Yes, he did.
Ferris Bueller looked into your soul every
Oh.
single time.
Oh, I see. Semantics. Okay.
Yes. My favorite type of mantics are the cis.
Gotcha.
So yes, when he's addressing us, it doesn't feel like he's, you know, saying lines to a camera. It feels like he's talking to us, and that's because of the skill of Matthew Broderick and the lovability of that adorable Munchkin. Even to this day, he's got that that quirkiness that makes you go, "Oh, Matthew Broderick," and that's why Ferris Bueller's Day Off is my number 6.
Okay, so as a device here, it would make a lot of sense that Ferris is the star of his own show because none of the other characters in Ferris Bueller's Day Off talk to us. So, in order for this to be Ferris understands that we, the audience, are there and that everybody else is just participating with Ferris in those moments, then everybody else would at one time or other be able to look at the camera or be able to say something to us. So it does kind of make a lot of sense that when we break it down to Ferris having a fever dream and that this is basically in his head, this is going to tie in perfectly with a movie that I've got a little bit further on down the list because it's the same exact thing. This is an internal dialogue, not an external dialogue. So very interesting. I like that idea. All right, my number 6 is a movie that I actually really hated. I didn't like this movie at all. I loved the first one. I will always be partial to it, but the second one sort of broke my heart and made me rethink my love of franchise. Um, Although in news of the world, there is a TV adaptation that was done, which was actually kind of interesting. It was an animated uh, take on the Mogwai. So now you know where I'm going. Okay, number 6 is Gremlins 2, the new batch. Now, what happens in Gremlins 2? And part of the reason that I hate this is because it doesn't operate as if it's metafiction. It operates as if we just took a brief pause in the movie, lost our minds, and then came back to the movie. Which I don't know. Maybe there was some kind of hallucinogenic in the Gremlins. I don't know. I mean, like I'm reaching for straw. I'm grasping at straws here. Uh, but Gremlins 2, the new batch, does this sort of interesting thing with the fourth wall break they where they take over a movie theater and start playing a nudist film. And Hulk Hogan shouts at the gremlins in the theater to start the film again. There's this super interesting idea about how this piece of metafiction is working because because it feels a little bit like they're trying to say, well, the gremlins are actually in the movie making process itself. I don't know if that was clear enough, but that's what I think that they were trying to say. Like, look, the gremlins get into everything and they make everything screw up and break and go crazy and whatever. And here they are actually in the very process of making this movie, and here's what we get. I did find that to be a bit interesting, not uh not super well explained, but it was interesting enough for me to add it to this list. Like, it's not necessarily a bad thing here, but I also don't think that they did a good job of giving us context for why they were breaking the fourth wall at all and how this worked in the metafiction universe. So, my number 6, Gremlins 2, the second batch. Um, uh, Interesting film, very interesting. Also another 1990s film. I got a couple of those on my list.
That was a 1990s film?
Yeah, 1990.
Huh. Huh. I guess I hadn't realized it was 1990s. And I try not to. I mean, I love the Gremlins. It's always a pleasure to watch those movies. But especially when it comes to Gremlins 2, I never really tried to make sense of it in any way because, it does have Hulk Hogan in it after all. And
It
I
was
know what you're
fun though.
thinking. Rocky 3. Or was it Rocky 2? No, Rocky 3 also has Hulk Hogan. In fact, that's the movie that got Hulk Hogan noticed to become Hulk. That's a whole other thing. My number 5. We're the top 5, Jen.
All right.
So my number 5 is, if you guessed a comedy, you'd be correct.
Okay.
I'm going to keep it short. We've talked about this movie before, but you know what? I'm going to hold on. Let me. Do you think I should talk about my number 5, or do you think we should have just cut this part altogether?
This feels like a setup.
Okay, it's a setup.
I mean, yeah.
Maybe we could hear from, Jen from selections number 9.
Oh boy. Oh, hey. Great. Yes, no, I'd love to hear your take on this.
Okay, and I guess I'll chime in from selection number 2, which is Get On With It.
Get on with it.
I'm For those of you that know it, you know what we're talking about. It's Monty Python and the Holy Grail when they just stop the movie to ask the audience, "Should we have cut this?" I feel like maybe we should have cut this. What do you think? And then you check in with other scenes, like just like other scenes in the movie, including scenes that haven't happened yet.
Including scenes that haven't happened yet. Yes. And then my favorite is the end of the movie when basically they have to stop production of the film so they can arrest everybody.
Yeah, because the investigation that's kind of going on.
Yes, throughout the movie, which is also extremely fourth wall breaking. See, I think this is actually a good example of being meta fiction. This is actually a good example of how to do it right. I mean, I can't say do it right because, come on, it's Monty Python and it's just hilarious from start to end. But the but the but the consequential nature of making the comedy part of, we're self-aware of our own comedy enough to throw all these things in and still move on is actually fairly good. So you get big props for this one, Josh.
And when will Arthur find the Grail? The room is he won't.
When he gets out of jail, maybe. Maybe
So
it's in jail. Maybe that's the point. I don't
uh,
know.
well, the only thing I can tell you is my number 5 weighs the same as a duck. So Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Okay. I was gonna make an African swallow joke, but I think I will not. Okay. Uh, let's see. My number 5. All right. Okay. Oof. Big breath here. This movie is not for everyone. Um, And when I say that, I mean this absolutely seriously. Like, I really feel like after watching this movie, um, it did not, it left me very uncomfortable. And I knew it would because I knew what the movie was about. I understood what was happening, but it was still extremely uncomfortable to watch. And I think it was even more uncomfortable to watch because it was clearly directed at the audience. That is, here's something that's happening to this fictional family. But the group of people who come in to do this thing to this fictional family are absolutely asking us, the audience, all the important questions or all the consequential questions. The movie is called Funny Games. Um, and it's a really difficult movie to watch. Um, it is full of the kind of sort of home invasion nightmare fuel that you would get from any, you know, horror thriller that is about home invasion. But where it really breaks is where the people, the boys in this gang, where they look at the camera and ask the questions about sort of what to do, what like as if we are spectators of their story, not just the bigger narrative that's happening. And by drawing us in that way, we become part of the metafiction. It's really, it's this is one case where I do feel like, okay, there's an incorporation of breaking the fourth wall, which honestly, I don't think they could tell this particular story without doing it this way. It wouldn't be the same movie. So it would feel a lot different. Um, but it's not just like missed comedic timing opportunities or, here's a chance to make myself look more funny. This is really a, hey, you're involved in this too, and you should feel bad about it because this is the essence of what makes humanity dark and terrible. And there's a there's an aspect of this that as you go into it and then are the all of the people are asking the questions of the audience where you know that no matter what you say it's not going to matter, and yet you're still compelled to think about these things, to think about the answers to these questions. It's difficult. It is very difficult to sort of process and watch. But I do think that the meta function of breaking the fourth wall does work here a bit. It did. This one didn't make me as mad as some of the other ones. Um, and I definitely thought that there was something to be had here, that from a narrative choice as a breaking the fourth wall as a function, it did actually work. It worked in the overall scheme of the movie. So I feel like this was a fairly good use of breaking the fourth wall. So Funny Games, number five. And on top of this movie being exactly what I just said, it is incredibly, it's divisive in a lot of ways. There's a lot that's happening in this movie where people are dying in ways that are just horrible, and it feels like they're dying for the glee of other people, so much more so than a lot of other horror movies where you don't really have, except maybe Terrifier, where you don't really have like a gleeful killer so much so as you do with these guys who also absolutely look like the boys next door. And so there's just a lot of sort of image plus breaking the image, having the narrative and then breaking the fourth wall, existing in a place where this kind of absolute evil can occur while knowing that you absolutely can't do anything about it. It's an interesting thing, but it's definitely not for everybody, and I really don't suggest that you watch this movie if you're not sort of like in a good place, because it is extremely psychologically disturbing. So, Funny Games, my number five.
I have not heard of that one. and we've been on a pretty good roll of me having heard of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's now usually when I haven't heard of something, my first thought is, yeah, I'm gonna go check that out. Now I'm not super sure
Yeah,
that
even as like a horror movie recommendation, I hedge away from this one unless I really know the person and I'm like, "Oh yeah, if you're looking for a really good psychological dark thriller, this is the one for you." Because it's just it's hard. It is really hard. And there's no way around it. Like you can't watch this movie and close your eyes during the scary parts. It's all part of the psychological drama. So yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't feel like anybody necessarily has to watch it. I'm just giving it out there as this is a good example of this particular movie.
well, I let that silence be a bit of a palate cleanser as we move on to my number four, which Jen, I'm gonna say you called me out on and kind of nailed it.
As I knew I would.
Spaceballs is my number four. What can I say? Mel Brooks, he's a guy that knows his fourth wall breaking gags, and to me, that's a good thing. I guess depending on the context. I'm not so much a fan of making that a well you keep going to, because if it's not inherently important to the actual narrative, then a time or two to get a gag across, that's a completely kind of different thing. It's just a joke. In this particular movie, Spaceballs, I'm gonna point out the scene where they're actually watching the movie. Trying to figure out what's going on, and eventually they get to the point where uh, they catch up to what's going on now. So they see themselves on the screen, and then look at the camera, and then look at the screen. Where's this? It's right now, sir. It's uh, not super, you know, complex. It's still extremely satisfying to me seeing these types of jokes that, quite frankly, I'd never seen before. But of course, since then, and it's probably not even the originator of that specific gag, but since then, a lot of people have attempted to emulate it, uh, kind of playing out the movie as it's happening. One also another Mel Brooks film, not that I'm trying to get two in here, but another favorite is Robin Hood Men in Tights, when Robin loses the archery contest, and he's like, "I lost, I I lost." Then he pulls out the script. He's like, "Wait, I get another shot," and everyone's like, "What?" And then just the entire cast, everyone just pulls out a script and like, yeah, he gets another shot. Okay. So checking the script to figure out what comes next is I think also a fun way to break the fourth wall. But number four is Spaceballs with, let's watch the movie um, as it's being played out. Spaceballs.
I mean, I knew that that would be on your list. That's, one of the reasons that I would never put it on one of my lists because, yeah, also,
Because you
I,
like the same things as Jack.
yeah, also, I didn't want to over explain it. And I try to make my lists as, try to make my list as different as I possibly can. Okay. my number four. My number four is a movie that I swear I played so many times in my house. I can almost recite every single line of dialogue. It is Aladdin. In Aladdin, there are a number of different fourth wall breaks. I'm going to start with the very beginning when the seller in the market tells us that basically he gives us kind of a rundown of his wares and says, "Here's all of my fine merchandise," and then nothing seems very appealing. So we, as the audience, start drifting off, and the seller hurries up and runs in front of the camera and shows us the genie's lamp. And then all of a sudden, we see the camera sort of repan in on him, and then we get the story. Actually, I think in the very first part, he says, "Come closer," and the camera actually hits him in the face. I seem to remember that. So there's that. And then the next one that I thought was like really funny was when Genie brings out, much like Spaceballs, the script and says, "Your line is, 'I'm going to free the genie.'" And he brings out the script again when he calls Jafar the tall, dark, sinister, ugly man. So those are two sort of little fourth wall breaks, which I think kind of made the movie interesting. Although honestly, these examples didn't need to be there. Even the peddler at the very beginning, although I appreciated the way that it drew us into the story, we could have done this differently, and it wouldn't have. I feel like it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the story at all. Um, I, the only reason that I put this on my list is because the eclectic type of humor that's in here feels like everything and the kitchen sink. So a little bit of breaking the fourth wall is sort of just necessary because it is everything in the kitchen sink humor. I mean, there's everything from um well, I'll just say that there is everything in here. There's slapstick comedy. There's all kinds of impersonations. There's all of these different um, little things like sort of kind of snippy sarcasm, and then there's fourth wall breaking, and then there's just it's a ton. So it kind of fits here. So I'll just say that Aladdin sort of fits the bill with the fourth wall breaking, using it in a okay kind of a way, and that makes my number four.
No, too close. Too close.
Too close, too close.
It's one of my favorites. I used to be able to quote it word for word.
Yeah, exactly. That I like I said, we played it so often in my house. I feel like I knew every single moment of dialogue.
I did. I literally did. On the bus rides, I had a friend that loved the movie as much as I did, and we would just recite the movie word for word.
Not a bad way of
God,
using your
we're
time.
such nerds. Anyway, excuse me. Excellent choice, if I do say so myself.
Thank you.
You ready for my number three?
I'm ready.
I think, again, it should be obvious that this is going to wind up on my list somewhere. And somebody had to split the Mel Brooks movies. Yeah, there's another one. Sue me. And this one is Deadpool. The Merc with a Mouth.
Of
Is,
course. I knew this one would make your
yeah,
list.
yeah, pretty. Yeah, everybody should. Um, I'm not even going to go into specific instances of breaking the fourth wall because it's just an entire movie of the main character Deadpool knowing that he's in a movie and cheating to the camera and addressing the audience and doing all sorts of crazy wacky stuff. Why? Because that's what Deadpool does, and I know when it comes to breaking the fourth wall in movies, it's hit or miss, right? But when it's a character like Deadpool that does it in the source material, where he, you know, jumps from the page to how do I put this? Uh, Influence the artists. You get the idea that, you know what, if you make a Deadpool movie, that fourth wall is just that, you know what, they didn't even bother building it. That's pretty much, they knew it was going to be broken. They're like, should we build a fourth wall? And set design's like, no, no, there's no point. So technically, the fourth wall wasn't broken because they didn't bother putting one in. That's my attempt at terrible
Uh,
humor. So anyway, Deadpool. I think one of the most surprising elements was not anything that happened in the movie, but more what happened in the audience. A lot of kids, a lot of kids in the audience. I don't know if it's because the parents are just, uh, well, I guess yeah, it's just irresponsible, or I guess I don't know. They're cool with it. There's a lot of adult stuff in there, and they're taking their kids, like under 10 kids, groups of them, to see Deadpool in the theaters. You know what? That's a tangent for another day. Deadpool is uh, a wonderfully fun film that uses these moments to stay true to the character, and that's why it's my number three.
so, in this case, I have such a hard time with the Deadpool movies because I like the stories, and I like a lot of the elements that they do in Deadpool. You know what I dislike though? I really dislike the fact that Deadpool takes so long to address the audience on so many different occasions, and again does not acknowledge at all that there is anything else around him that is happening, or that the people around him, that nobody else is in this meta universe, which makes me believe that maybe Deadpool is actually dead. That maybe this is not happening. That the whole idea in this metafiction world is that Deadpool is dead. And all of this is just happening in his brain. And this is why he can address us while nobody else being able to, in his proximity, can address us at all. It's also why he is so fantastical at everything that he does. He simply is not real. It's an interesting sort of idea. I'm going to get to this in another movie that's is coming right up on my list, um, because this seems to be very much the trope, which is when you are addressing the audience, you're not real. You're part of a different. You're either not there, or you're fiction in your fiction, which is very interesting. And this is exactly what happens in my number three choice, which is Fight Club. In Fight Club, exactly the same thing happens. We have characters who are compelling all by themselves. They are absolutely cool characters, if you will. And yet we get multiple characters, well, actually I should say multiple characters, I should say multiple times, breaking the fourth wall so that they can tell us more about the complexity of what's going on. um, why is Tyler taking up all of his different jobs? um, w- why are there all of these things? Well, I won't get into them all because some of them I feel like are really icky. But there are things that happen in Fight Club which sort of give this idea that what's happening is not really what's happening. It's a narration of who Tyler Durden is. And we need that because he's not a real person. And so the fourth wall becomes a way to address sort of the motivations of a character that we can never be intimate with because he's not real. We can only see him through the visage, through the eyes of another character. And I do actually find that kind of interesting. Um, it works, but um, it's also, what's a good word for this? It's taxing on the viewers. Like, as good of an idea as Fight Club was, the 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 mental gymnastics that you have to do when you're watching this movie and then process everything at the end is I think a bit much for a lot of audiences. I'm not saying that it's not great. It absolutely is great. Edward Norton, Brad Pitt, Helena Bonham Carter, Jared Leto, Meatloaf. I mean, everybody is just great in this movie. But there is, I think, a point where Edward Norton, as the narrator, becomes sort of embroiled in the storytelling in a way that I think ends up being a bit confusing. And again, by the time that the movie ends, we understand what has happened, and we get sort of the gist of where everything has kind of gone wrong along the ways. But the fourth wall breaking is sort of the only issue, or the only issue. It's the only way that they can communicate the story. And I always got the feeling by watching Fight Club that this was sort of like the ego's attempt to explain a superego. All the things that you aspire and want to do but can't do, and then you have a momentary fleeting at the end of your life, why didn't I do all these things? That is sort of, that's the feeling that Fight Club gives me. It's a great movie, it's a fabulous movie, but it's also, in terms of its fourth wall breaks, I don't think you could tell the story of I don't think you could tell the story of Fight Club without having those fourth wall breaks, because the metafiction is the point. He's not real. And that's the whole thing. He's just not real. So, Fight Club makes my number 3.
His name was Robert Paulson.
Robert Paulson. Thank you. No,
So
wait, what? That's get out of town.
the thing about Fight Club, you're absolutely right. It's a movie with so much going on, upstairs, mentally,
Hmm.
that you just can't. I know that the saying is "show don't tell." That's just it's not always feasible, especially when a lot of the development is taking place, sort of in the meta arena, as you were pointing out. It's an excellent choice, Jen.
Well, and let's talk just real briefly about the fact that this is a David Fincher movie, and David Fincher doesn't do anything by mistake. I'm not that I've seen. I mean, maybe somebody will call one piece out for me, but I find that the big choices, the bold choices that David Fincher chooses tend to be very dramatically played. So I don't I don't, think that this was a bad choice of using fourth wall break, but I do find it to be probably overly complex, and I don't think that you could even tell the story without that kind of complexity. So, yeah, it is what it is.
And inserting a single frame. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Splicing two things together. Exactly.
Okay, so we're at my number two.
Number 2.
Number two, I kind of teased a little bit. It is yet another Mel Brooks joint. And I think we're going to talk about it very briefly here because Mel Brooks gets a lot of play around here. My
Mm,
number two was Blazing Saddles.
of course.
Now, you got a lot of your standard, you know, cheat to the camera fare, addressing the audience in regards to the lower than average intelligence of the townspeople, those kinds of things. But my favorite part in particular is the all out studio brawl at the end of the movie where this western um, fight spills over onto the lot. And what is I mean, at someone point says someone says like, "Screw you, this is a Mel Brooks movie," and
Yeah,
they start
right.
and they say it. This is a Mel Brooks movie, and the fight just spills onto another movie. It's a lot of fun. It's a great way to end a western in the 20. It's like, oh, now we're in the 20th century on a fancy dancy movie. Uh, that's okay. This is happening, but I think uh, I think the most um, I'm not even sure what the word is to describe it, but when you see your two primaries literally riding off into the sunset, you know, it's your typical Western ending, right? Stereotypical, I should say. Your heroes are riding off into the sunset, and they're riding off to the sunset. Nowhere in particular. I always wanted to go there. Um, then they stop and they dismount, and then they get into a car and drive away because the movie's over.
Right.
It's one of those things where you go, yeah, this is Mel Brooks doing Mel Brooks stuff, and I love every second of it. Blazing Saddles is a classic movie in pretty much every regard. If you haven't watched it, well, I have a feeling if you're listening to this, you must have seen it at some point. But if you haven't, it's something you should just check out immediately. Blazing Saddles is my number two, and it's a virtual, you know, how to break the fourth wall in so many different ways. Sometimes it'll hit, you'll dig it. Sometimes maybe not. Either way, it's like fourth wall breaking 101 all over.
Well, I mean, that's actually a pretty classic choice. And yeah, I do think that Mel Brooks actually sort of over uses fourth wall breaks, but okay, that's his style. We'll give him that. All
Everybody's
right.
got a shtick.
Everybody's got a shtick. Yeah, that's a good word. He's got that shtick. Okay. My number two choice, which we did actually briefly talk about, is Psycho. And Psycho okay, this is another movie where the meta fiction where the character recognizes that he is a fiction, but in Psycho it goes one step further. Even though there is the recognition that this is a fiction, it is never conveyed to the audience that this is a fiction because it is the reality of the fictitious character in the reality of the fiction we're watching. And I know that that sounds paradoxic. It doesn't maybe sort of work altogether, but it is actually what's happening. There is a character. That character has created a persona. That persona is a maniacal killer. That maniacal killer looks at us, the audience, tells us things about the inner workings of his mind and then lets us draw all of these crazy conclusions about what happened and why it happened and what's going on while all around him on the in the real world, the real fictional world, things are happening that we are not directly aware of, and then we become aware of them only at the very end when we realize that this is none of this is real. This has all been happening in his mind. It's quite interesting because I don't think I've ever seen a fiction where the character is deluded in the fiction so much so that he's addressing the audience in that delusion. That is, he's not talking to us as the fictional character that he is. He's talking to us as the fictional character that he believes that he is. So it's a fiction in a fiction. It's quite, I feel like that is quite layered and interesting that it was able to be pulled off the way that it was. At the end of American Psycho, I understood what was going on. I had a really good feel for what had just happened. Unlike Fight Club, where I had to sort of process it a bit. Um, and so the storytelling in American Psycho, I think, was done brilliantly and far better than I think most personally than I think that most stories with this kind of metafiction have been told before. This particular performance gets kind of an A plus from me. So American Psycho gets my number two.
Okay. We yeah, I called that one out earlier.
Yes, you did. Good choice.
Well, you ready for number ones?
I'm ready for your number one. What is your number one? I'm actually intrigued now. I thought we had
It could,
gotten to most of them.
yeah, you saw the list that I've come up to this point, and you're like, no, he already checked all the boxes. Where could he possibly be going?
Don't
Where
know.
could it possibly go? This is crazy. This is crazy.
Okay,
No,
well,
it's
maybe not
crazy.
that dramatic, but intriguing.
I'm just that might pique your curiosity.
You do have a flair for the dramatic, Josh.
I try. My number one is not a gag. Although this movie has a lot of gags, but this is not one of them. This movie does not break the fourth wall to elicit a laugh. This movie does not break the fourth wall to do. I guess laugh was the only thing I had going for me. So my number one of the greatest films to ever be shot, one of the greatest comedies ever made,
Oh boy.
starring one of the greatest performers of all time. It is The Great Dictator, starring Charlie Chaplin, 1940.
Ah.
And I'm going to tell you this: there might be some, arguments out there in 10-1 land about whether or not this is actually breaking the fourth wall, but I do believe, as when some people out there agree with me, I've looked it up. I'm not alone. I believe that the final speech, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, monologue delivered to a camera on film, that last speech isn't Charlie Chaplin as the how do I put it, the dictator, the comedic character that he was portraying, but it's him being himself, genuinely speaking to the camera about ending the rise of fascism in Europe. And mind you, this movie was released in 1940. Can we get a little historical context on this? Jen,
Mm-hmm.
you live in Hawaii, yes?
I do.
Do you remember when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Are you asking me for a date?
Yeah, do you remember when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Well, I actually
A
wasn't
year.
born, but it was December 7th, 1941.
Yes, 1941. So this movie comes out. about and let's face it, just looking at it, it's a spoof on Hitler.
Right.
But the U.S. hadn't entered the war. But through communications with, uh, you know, friends and family from European nations, people knew what was already going on and the danger that Hitler was um, bringing to everybody in Europe. But the U.S. would still not enter the war. This movie had this impassioned plea from its star to help uh, free and stop well free the people and stop the rise of the Nazi regime over a year before Pearl Harbor was attacked. This speech could have and should have been an eye opener for so many people in power because it came from such a strong place. It came from a real place. This breaking of the fourth wall from Charlie Chaplin, practically begging to have the powers that be step in and be the powers that be. It's the most uh, powerful emotional fourth wall break I can imagine. And for that reason, The Great Dictator is my number one film for fourth wall breaks.
Good choice. That was a great choice. I actually really like that movie too, both for its historical significance, but also just for the tone and tenor that the movie takes. It's actually quite good. So
And it's got a lot of silly stuff too.
good. Yes, it's a great choice. Okay, my number one movie is kind of a recent addition to movie list making, if you will. It is the movie that kind of chronicles Mr. Rogers, and I, I I guess it does more than sort of chronicle him. It just sort of tells the story of who Mr. Rogers was and what he sort of stood for. It's fairly amazing, in my opinion, that after all this time, we still have the ideas of who Mr. Rogers was, what he did, what his level and dedication to children was, and just sort of how he made us pay attention. That to me is, I think, the biggest part of who Mr. Rogers was. Okay, so where is the fourth wall break? Well, the fourth wall break is um, Mr. Rogers walks into a cafe or a diner, I guess. And the diner is kind of noisy. There's quite a bit of, noise and stuff that's going on. And he he asks his lunch partner to be quiet for just 1 minute and think about all the people who loved you into being. Now, I mean, that line alone is amazing. Think about all the people who loved you into being. Now, where does this become fourth wall breaking? Well, mo- seconds after he says that, the entire restaurant goes quiet, even the wait staff, everybody. And basically, the soundtrack is completely gone. It's silent. All of the noises from any place disappear. And it feels uncanny. Um, there are sort of like some very slow camera movements, but they're very slow, as if it was purposeful, that everything has slowed down in this moment of silence. And then, after a full moment, and it is a moment, everything resumes. It comes back. And the implication is you, the audience, participate in what Hank Williams, of what Tom Hanks is saying to us as Frank uh, Rogers. I just said Frank Rogers. I have Frank on the brain for some reason. Fred Rogers. So Mr. Rogers is telling us, the audience, think about all the people who loved you into being. Everything goes incredibly silent. Everything, like the world, becomes silent, as if Mr. Rogers has the ability to reach through time and space, even to the audience who's watching a story about him in the most metafiction way possible, to engage us in his very thoughtful questions about who are the people who loved you into being. Because that is essential to who is Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is always all about who are the people that love you, who are the people that help you, who are the people, the positive side of sort of everything. If you think about it, there are many. And I absolutely loved that. I thought it was a brilliant moment in the film. Very, just one time. Um, but it really totally works. And it made the whole, it gave the whole movie a different idea, a different level, as if this is the story of Mr. Rogers looking directly at you, not Mr. Rogers as this is the story of Mr. Rogers. It is still in existence, is Mr. Rogers talking directly to us. I absolutely loved it. I just thought it was a brilliant, brilliant moment. It didn't last. I mean, it was only 1 minute. It's a long 1 minute in a film. But it wasn't like it was constantly repeated. It was just a single moment in time to give us that perspective, and it really worked. So, my number one choice, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, the story of Mr. Rogers.
I don't think I've seen it.
Oh, it's fairly new. But it is absolutely, it's really well done. If you were ever comforted by Mr. Rogers as a child, watching the story of how Mr. Rogers became who Mr. Rogers is it's even more comforting. It's like a chicken soup in a chicken soup. It's made by your mom, knowing that she spooned love into it. Like, it's just that beautiful. I honestly, I'm not usually such a sappy person about this stuff, but I was really touched. Really touched.
Aw,
Yeah.
we found a soft spot in Jen.
Yeah, it's Mr. Rogers. Wait until they tell the story of Sesame Street, then I'll really be bawling.
Oh boy, that's gonna be how that'd be a fun watch though.
Mhm.
So we got through our lists.
We did.
I think you had a wonderful one.
So did you. They were all great.
Well, thank you, thank you. We I think we always do a wonderful job, not only creating but curating.
Sometimes I'm actually surprised that we get through our lists with some of the movies that are on there. Like, I'm actually surprised at the both the depth and the breadth of the movies that we choose, because we really do choose a lot of, like, both uncommon movies but also really thoughtful, like very thoughtfully presented movies. So yeah, I think we both do a great job with this.
Sometimes I wonder what people would think if they saw our lists. You know, like in just any list with these movies stacked up to each other, but You take away the header of what the list is, tell them figure out the common thread.
Oh, wow. That could be fun.
Oh, that would be nuts, and I can't wait to try it someday.
Right? Yeah, I like that.
So maybe one day we'll be like, okay, here's our lists. That whoever figures out what their lists of will win a prize.
I think
I'll
that
send
would be,
somebody a T-shirt for that.
yeah, that'd be a great idea. That would be a
So
good idea. We'll
so
we'll, we'll
we're
try to get something obscure,
absolutely the harder the better. Uh,
right?
let's okay. Well, we'll workshop that on the other side of the live uh, light. And how about I'll go down my list, you go down your list, and then give us our homework for next time.
All right.
All right, the list of fourth wall shattering movies. My list. Number 10, Wayne's World. Number 9, Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. Number 8, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. That's right, Kevin Smith made it. Big surprise. Number 7, The Fablemans. Number 6, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Number 5, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Number 4, Spaceballs. Number 3, Deadpool. Number 2, Blazing Saddles. And number 1, with a bullet, The Great Dictator.
Nice. All right. I start with History of the World, Part 1. Goodfellas, Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock. The Pink Panther, take your pick, anyone with Inspector Clouseau. Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Funny Games. Aladdin. Fight Club, American Psycho, and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. All right. So, we are next week, we will actually have our first podcast for November. And honestly, I feel like this year has just, I don't know, escaped. Like it has gone so fast. And it started making me think about all of the movies out there that deal with dun 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 time travel. So, we are going to pick our top 10 movies that we think are the best time travel movies out there. I can kind of tag this list almost in my sleep because this is one of the genres that I absolutely love. I hate picking it apart because time travel is kind of one of those weird wonky things. And the more that you understand that time is not linear, the more it makes your head hurt. So you try not to think about it. But in a fictitious story, it's so cool because the possibilities are absolutely endless. Now, I know that we sort of did one like this before. So I'm going to give it a tiny bit uh, of a, what's a good word? Of a twist. Okay, because I don't want to have the same list that we had before. So the movies that deal with time travel have to be set in the future. That is, you can't have a movie with time travel that exists today. It has to be something that happens in the future. So not present people hopscotching around in, whatever. It's got to be stories of time travel in the future.
So is point of origin the future or destination?
It would be point of origin is the future.
Okay. Okay.
So I'll give you an example, okay? Because I think this might help. So, and this is going to sound crazy because obviously we're past this point now, but uh, the movie, uh, the movie that was the original, um, well, actually, that one actually doesn't work. Sorry, I was thinking about the Planet of the Apes, but that one feels like I can't quite get my fingers around that one because I don't remember exactly when Planet of the Apes was supposed to take place. But let's say Star Trek: The Voyage Home. that would be an example of a future plot where they're using time travel.
So somebody from, we'll
The future.
say, the future 22nd century and forward.
They can no, it can be somebody from the future that comes back to us, like, in our time, but the point of origin has to be the future, and then they are coming back to us. Or it could be they're in the future and they are time traveling to points unknown from the future.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, the future for us is kind of a moving target. So after all,
That's a
if a
good point.
movie takes, like starts out in 2025, is that the future?
Yeah, no, kind of not. I would say more like if it takes place in the next century.
Or maybe something that's like obviously futuristic?
Yeah, obviously futuristic, I think is that's sort of what we're looking for.
Well, because the not that it really went through time travel stuff on the show, but Lost in Space, that was what, like 1990s that was set
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, Lost in Space would be a good example. It was supposed to take place in at a point in the future, even though yes, it's a you're right, it's a moving target. But yes, Lost in Space would be a great example. Not a movie, but yes.
Okay, so we're looking for movies that start off in the, you know air quote future.
Right.
Okay, okay,
Like, as an example, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, that wouldn't work because it's clearly taking place sort of at a
contemporarily.
moment which is not. Yeah, that's not going to work. Um, but a movie like I mean, to throw out another one, a movie like Arrival would work because it is absolutely about the future.
Okay. And I at first I was like, how am I going to narrow this down? And now I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to put my thinking cap on and go over my standing list of great time travel movies and figure out, uh, just from the point of view in which it was made versus the year that it's actually set in. Okay,
Yeah, it
I
might
think I
take a
got it.
little thinking. It might take a little thinking. It might take a little filtering to kind of get there. But there's some really good movies from even the 1960s which, they set their origin story, quote unquote, in the future. And it's
Hmm.
supposed to be, even though we know that that technology is like, oh my god, that's ridiculous, it's supposed to take place in the future, and then they time travel from there. And so, like, those I feel like are totally fine.
Okay,
Does that make
I'm
sense?
I'm very much looking. Okay, just one more point of clarification, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The Terminator, the time traveler, is clearly from the future, but he's not the focus, if you will.
Yeah, so see, movies like that I feel like probably aren't the movies we're looking for, because those would have been
Okay.
covered under our original movies about time travel that we had from a while ago.
Hmm.
And then that movie would have been in there. But this is more specific. Like, I'm looking for more real sci-fi movies that kind of take place in a or at a future time, and sort of really embrace the time travel idea, either through time forward or through time backwards.
Okay. Okay. Are you sure we've done a time travel thing before?
I'm sure that we didn't we? Because didn't I have Time Bandits on mine?
Well, I mean, you could put that in under so many things.
I feel like I'm sure that we did this one because I remember Time Bandits. I remember you having Bill and Ted. Uh Yeah, I'm almost positive that we did one. You have the list. You have the
Yeah, we've done best friends movies, sexual chemistry, battle of the movie bands, fairy tales in the movies, adaptations of IP we're dying to see, nautical films, the end of the world, movies that inspire your Halloween spirit, which means we've been doing this show for over a year.
we have.
Spooky seasons 2, 3, and 4. Best of 2022 so far. Uh, War movies pre 20th century, animation pre 1980, movies that deal with Santa lore, shopping days, the most anticipated movies of 2023 non-franchise. Should probably revisit that and like
Yeah, we should.
see how if we liked what we were anticipating, or if we even saw what we were anticipating. 70s Earthbound sci-fi, best of 1982, unconventional love stories, the afterlife, vacation movies, movies about making movies, the playbook to our hearts. I really like that meta episode. That was
Yeah, that was
such
good.
an insight into us as peoples. The Cars, the Thing, movie Cars, movies that make real people look better than real life,
Hmm.
movie cults, Resurrection, Summertime, and the listing is easy. I guess that was our summer movie list. Lists of fours. That would be the fourth installment of franchises. Puzzle movies, actors turned directors, English royalty, Eurovision represent. That's where each movie had to represent a different country that is represented in the Eurovision contest. Critics' tears, uh, stuff that critics hated but we loved. World War II, U.S. military films, ancient times, literary adaptations. I almost messed up, but I didn't. Cops in film, band cameos in movies, and last week's one-liners. So it doesn't
Wow.
seem like we've actually had to do a straight-up time travel episode.
I'm really surprised. I really thought that we did this one. But okay. Well, I mean, I could take the twist off of it, but I feel like it would be more fun if we didn't.
You're right, because looking looking over the list, it's like the more weird and oddly specific it is, the more fun it is for us to do the mental gymnastics to get the stuff to fit in there.
Yeah, I
Um,
totally agree. I
I
totally
also
agree.
think this is your passive aggressive way of saying you'll never get a kids movie in here.
Oh no, I know better than that. You'll get clerks in there somehow. but
Did you
see,
know
there was this
Randall was from the
part.
future?
Yes, exactly. I have no illusions about this, okay? But I just thought it would be super interesting since we haven't done anything super sci-fi in a while to kind of get the sci-fi angle in there. And what
Yeah,
better way than, because time travel can be sort of it can encompass a lot. I just watched a movie last night that had time travel because somebody actually built a hadron collider out of spare parts, for God's sakes. Oh God, it was ridiculous. But anyway, but I really thought it would be cool to get like some, neat science fiction going. And usually they do a good job with that when they are set in the future and then either time travel to the past or time travel to places even further in the future. We'll give it a try. See what happens.
oh, I think it's
I
gonna be a
mean,
lot of fun.
the worst thing that could happen is we can't come up with enough movies.
And it wouldn't be the first time that's happened. And suddenly the topics changed before we hit
we'll
the air.
we'll just make up some. Well, I thought about writing this screenplay, and here's what it was. We'll make it work. We'll make it work.
We always do. And you
Yes.
know what else I think works?
Oh,
Uh, Coming up with excellent dishes to prepare for spooky season based on our favorite spooky movies and TV shows.
So
Where can
hey,
I find more about that?
I have a website for you. It's called moviesandmeals.com. And
Noise.
at moviesandmeals.com, We are, although I haven't switched over the page, I'm switching it over tonight. It's going to be all about Candyman tonight. So, Candyman, we've got a chicken recipe for city chicken. We've got a Candyman drink called the Red Hook. We've got a Candyman beehive cake. And we've got some other Candyman specialties. So join us over at moviesandmeals.com. And yeah, we've got tons of Halloween stuff going on over there. So join us. It'll be fun. And where can we find all of the Wadco/Josh stuff?
Well, as always, you can go to wadcomedia.com. There you will find all of the wonderful links and links that you need to find out all of the social informations, all of the Facebooks and the X's and the tubes of you, and just basically everything you need to find links to stuff to like and follow. WatcoMedia.com. If you're into merchandise, there's a page for that. If you're into supporting via Patreon, I don't recommend it, but there's a page for that. And if you're wondering why I don't recommend it, it's because if you are feeling generous enough to throw down some money, then by all means, I'd prefer you go to the merchandise. Not because we get more money for that, because God knows we don't. But it just feels, I don't know. I'd rather you have something that you can hold in your hands and say, this is what I spent my money on. Or if you must, this is what I spent my money on. Either way, it's something you can have in your hands and hold because it's a real thing instead of a digital promise that I may or may not do something in the future. And quite frankly, it wouldn't be the first time I forgot to do stuff. Sorry.
Oops.
Yeah, it happens. So, yeah, head on over to wadcomedia.com and don't forget to tune in on 21021 every weekish as Jen and I create very interesting and arbitrary list about movies and what they have in them. And of course, the Wadcast every Friday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And tomorrow night, strangely enough, I know what the topic is.
Oh, what is it?
We are going to do the anatomy of a scary movie.
Oh man. Why am I not a guest on this on this? Sorry, I can't be, but I'll try to listen.
And please don't.
Okay.
Because you're going to be like, they're wrong.
Well, lucky for you, I have an all-day seminar tomorrow, so I'll try, but I'll just give you some pointers later.
Yeah, I imagine I'm gonna have an inbox full of notes. This is everything you got wrong. Ah, crap! I knew
It'll be
it would
fun.
be.
It's always fun to hear Josh and Brandon talk. It's always fun to hear them chatter back and forth. Trust me, it's great.
We just want to talk about the stuff that we think makes good scary movies and the stuff that doesn't make good scary movies. You know,
There you go.
it's going to be a little subjective. If Jen,
I got a
you
small
were
bit
you're
of
ready
homework
to,
for you.
oh, you do? Okay.
If you yes, if you can before tomorrow, before you discuss the anatomy of a scary movie,
Hmm.
watch the new movie that is on Netflix called Talk to Me.
Talk to me.
Yes, it
That
is
sounds
quite
familiar.
good. It is surprisingly quite good. As a horror movie, it's an Australian horror film.
Okay.
I was pleasantly surprised by it, and it really does have all of the right mix, the right timing, everything. So definitely give it a try.
That reminds me of a list that we need to do in the future, which is, I'm just going to throw this title out there right now. I don't know when we're going to do it, but we're going to do it at some point. It's movies that got the IP so wrong. Because the first thing that
Oh,
comes to mind is Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey.
oh yeah. Oh man, I have thoughts about that movie.
So
Oh, I
one
have
day
so
we'll
many
be able
thoughts
to get
about
to
that
those
movie.
thoughts.
Yeah. Good. That sounds like a good one. I like that.
Well, I guess the only thing left to do is the only thing left to do. So, uh, why don't you go ahead and say good night, Jen?
Good night, Jen.